We appreciate you getting started with us and looking forward to the clearinghouse discussion. First thing we always like to do is discuss a little bit about CMS. We are a medical review officer at Morrow Company. We're also a TPA or third-party administrator. Now, typically we put these two terms together, but for the purpose of the clearinghouse, we separate them because they treat them differently. A medical review officer's job is to review and report drug screen results, negatives and positives, and report them correctly to the employer. The TPA's job is a little bit more vague. It includes anything from paying the bills to setting up clinics to assisting with training or any of the above. A lot of you out there are both MRO and or TPA clients as well as our other tasks. We're also a consortium. We manage our own consortium .stop as well as others for other companies. I know that we have several smaller companies out there that are also on the webinar today. We have a 24/7, 365 post-accident coordination. Most of you are aware of that. It's available for any of our clients at any time, day or night, nationwide. And we're very proud of the service that we provide there. We also offer a comprehensive sleep apnea program. Our chief MRO is Dr. Joseph Sentef, who's also the chief medical officer for the FMCSA in Washington, D.C. We've been incorporated actually since today in 1995. We're starting our 25th year in business. And in that time, we've reported over 2 million drug screens. Actually, we're getting a lot closer to 3 million at this point. And a lot of you know me. I'm Grady Phillips. Oh, wait, sorry, that's an old picture. That's actually me. The people that we have in front of us today are a very diverse group. I know that we have company owners, VPs of safety and HR, safety directors, drivers, doctors, clinic owners, and staff, and others. We know that a lot of people have a lot of experience with Clearinghouse. We know that some people have never heard of the Clearinghouse before. So forgive me if I get a little bit too basic, but this is an introduction class after all. Today's agenda, we want to discuss what journalists apparently call the 5 W's. But most of you who can count will realize there are actually 6 items on there: the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And for today's discussion, the how is where the real meat of the discussion is. But we'll start with what the clearinghouse is, why we need it, who will use it, when it will start, where it is, and how you will use it. Who, where, when, why, and how, as you can see. And then we'll do a couple other slides of how you prepare and things to do now. But to get started, what is the clearinghouse? The clearinghouse is a database or a group of different spreadsheets that's going to exist on a server somewhere in the world. The definition of a clearinghouse is an agency or organization that collects and distributes something, especially information. The information collected and distributed on the clearinghouse is going to be violations. Those violations are going to include positives, refusals, actual knowledge of drug use, and this part is confusing to a lot of people. Those violations will stay on the clearinghouse for a minimum of 5 years. If the driver does not complete the SAP program, substance abuse program, or a return to work process, as different people call it, different things, it will stay on forever. So for example, if a driver has a violation, immediately goes through an SAP process, finishes it, that information will be available to current or future employers for the next 5 years. If a driver waits 4 years, does not complete an SAP process, and then does go through it, it will still show up for a remaining year. If a driver never goes back, never completes an SAP process, it will stay on theoretically forever. The other thing that will be stored is the SAP process. And we'll get into more of this in just a few minutes, but the SAP will include things as the SAP initial notes, the return to duty negative results, and the follow-up completion process. So why do we need the clearinghouse? There's a known loophole in the drug testing world. A driver can easily test pre-employment for a company and fail, be positive, refuse any number of issues, and it will never show up to his or her current employer, or if they are not currently employed, they can skate from employer to employer. We at CMS have seen this many times over the years where we will have multiple companies for which we act as the MRO. We'll see the same person test positive from one to the next, and by law, we're not allowed to tell the carrier. It drives us nuts. We really can't stand it. We report it to the FMCSA, the people that we know up there, and they take care of it. They'll contact the company and let them know that they're not allowed to employ that person, and usually reach out to the driver and make sure they're understanding of the regulations. However, the loophole that we have should be closed by the clearinghouse if it works correctly. So why are they doing it now, not 20 years ago? Well, back in the 1980s, when the drug testing process was developed, as many of you know, there were a lot of issues and concern of the government being big brother and controlling all of our information. That's why the drug test process doesn't put all the authority in any one hand. You have the collector, you have the lab, and you have the MRO, all separate but equal, very similar to our system of government. Back then, government was not trusted to manage information. I think that most of us would agree it's still not trusted to manage information. However, we have become more immune to our data being given out freely. But if we stop and think for just a little while, what are we giving the government in this situation? What could this data be used for? Well, within a few years, every employee, every driver that you apply for your job, the government will know who they were, where they applied, and based on your other data, they'll be able to easily track the movement of individuals. Should this information ever be hacked, that is very valuable information for your competition, for yourself, for others. And so there is a tremendous value to maintaining the privacy of this program. And the government has worked very hard to establish that, and we wish them well. Who's going to use the clearinghouse? Well, they're estimating 4 to 6 million users. That's not a joke. There are 3.5 million drivers in the country. All carriers will be required to use the clearinghouse. Only some of those drivers, at least at first, will be required to register, and we'll go into that momentarily. All CDL holders are eligible, but only some will need to register. Service agents such as ourselves, MROs, TPAs, and SAPs, again, that's substance abuse professionals. Many people are not too familiar with that term, will be required to register for the clearinghouse and use it. And many of you saw a release from the clearinghouse about a month ago saying that there was a 3-year delay. This is the only part of the clearinghouse that's going to be delayed by 3 years. State driver's license agencies, or SDLAs, are not going to be required to use the clearinghouse to approve new driver's licenses or renewals for the next 3 years. And that 3 years is a date that will pop up a few times as we continue to discuss. So you can start paying attention to that at this point as well. We do have many collectors and collection staff that are in the audience today, and collectors will not need to register for the clearinghouse. I do think it's important that collectors and their respective owners do know at least a basic information about the clearinghouse so that they can assist employers that may not have received adequate training, and so that they also know how to handle refusals. The clearinghouse is open now. This is the big surprise. It actually, we registered over the weekend. It was intended to open sometime in October, and here we are. And so at the end of this demonstration, there is the link to the clearinghouse where you can go and register your company. Before you jump into that, we do have a little bit of information that's from our experience that's on the next slide. The full clearinghouse is to go live January 6th, so there's no real rush to registration. You still have a couple of months before you would have to do anything with it. Even after the clearinghouse starts, the full power of the clearinghouse will not exist until 2023. The moment the clearinghouse starts, no positives will be reported. But as of the end of January 6th, there should be some. By January 7th, there'll be more, and progressively as we go, anything that is a positive, the clearinghouse will grow with that data. I'm sure that initially the most offending drivers who are positive multiple times will start to show up right away. And so it is important that we do start using the clearinghouse immediately to try to start tracking these down. When the full history is in by 2023, the clearinghouse will then replace any other drug and alcohol verifications that you currently have to do from other employers. So again, if it works, if everything holds together, it should eventually make everyone's life a little easier. So where will the clearinghouse be located? I'm not going to lie, this is probably the hardest one to answer when I'm doing the who, what, where, when, and why, because the clearinghouse is actually able to be logged in from anywhere. It's a database. Now, it is interesting that only the FMCSA is running the clearinghouse, and for those of you who may not know, that's Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. The other agencies of the government, the FTA, Transit, which is busing, FAA, airplanes, FRA, railroad, PHMSA, which is pipeline and oil, and the Coast Guard are not currently going to be in the clearinghouse. So if you are in a company that has multiple agencies, that may complicate how you report a little bit, how you handle your paperwork. So just keep that in mind. Interestingly, the database will be owned by the FMCSA, and it's currently developed by the USDOT Volpe Center. They are the self-acclaimed nerd lab located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. When you actually look at the Volpe Center, they're a pretty interesting group. It looks like they are on top of things. They're claimed to have up to 300 projects going at any time and help with projects across 9 modes of transportation. Most importantly, the full website does not yet exist, at least not publicly. And some of you may noticed the hashtag at the bottom that I may refer to from time to time. It doesn't exist yet. This webinar, other demonstrations are based on the regulations. We don't know anything about how the website is going to look. We don't know if it's going to work. We are just planning and doing training based on the regulations that are out there for all of us. How will carriers use the clearinghouse? Okay, now we're really going to get started into the details and run through the process. The first thing you have to do is create a clearinghouse account. As we said earlier, it's currently open for registration. You'll notice that we have included the DOT regulation that most of the slide is created from for your reference, and can certainly assist anyone that needs help. So to create a clearinghouse account, you are required to have at least one administrator, certainly would recommend at least two, and you're allowed to have unlimited login accounts. You will be required to have your name, address, and phone number, your US DOT number if you have one. Again, I know that we have several small companies, and I know that several states do not require DOT numbers for intrastate companies. We've had several discussions about this, and the regulations do specify if you do not have a DOT number that they may request additional information. We've not yet experienced that. If you are a smaller company, we'd be more than happy to help you walk through that process if you need. You also have to include the name of the person or persons that are authorized to do the work. And this is a quote from the regulations. You'll have to have any additional information required to validate identity. Don't really know what that is. We at CMS have already registered as a CTPA, and no additional information was needed. It was actually fairly simple. When you log in as a carrier, a TPA is optional. For those clients that do use us as TPA, please go ahead and request us. That should be a pretty simple process. Your registration is valid for 5 years. Again, this is from the regulations. I don't know what that means if they're going to kick you out. The registrations also, or the regulations also say that they will verify the above information annually. Not sure if that will be a checkbox if you log in just to verify, or how exactly that will work. This is the part that was our experience that I think is useful. When you do register, because they are concentrating on security, they do require some type of verification, either a phone number or a third-party authenticator program. You can set it up to text the person once they set up, or we at CMS have a third-party authentication program whenever we log into our computers that just verifies identity, and so it worked out well for us. But depending on your company size, your IT security, may be a great idea to get with them before you sign up with the clearinghouse, to have that in place so that when you sign up, it's an easy process and you're not necessarily depending on your individual employees' phones, personal cell phones, to verify that identity. So the carriers will do both what's called a push and a pull in the system. And they'll do that with the pull part is considered full and limited queries. Now, this is a terminology that they're creating. The difference, so a query is just asking the database, do you have any information? The difference between a full and limited query is this. A limited query is asking the database, do you have information on this driver? And the clearinghouse will either say, yes, I do, or no, I don't. They don't give you any detail. The full query will say either no, I don't, or yes, I do, and here it is. They have this violation. They went through an SAP process. Then they had another violation. Basically, all of that information over the last 5 years, as we've discussed. A full query is absolutely required for every new hire, or if any limited query says something exists. The full query also requests consent from a driver within the clearinghouse. This means that the driver will have to register. We'll get into that momentarily when we discuss how drivers will use the clearinghouse. You also have to do an annual query of all drivers. Now, this annual query may either be limited or full. A limited query does not require consent inside the clearinghouse, meaning the driver does not have to actually log in. You can have a blanket release that is applicable to all your drivers that meet certain criteria, such as the length of time that the release is good for, consent to a particular company or companies. This is one issue that we don't have resolved yet. There have been many, many requests for a template of this release that would exist outside of the clearinghouse for limited queries. One does not yet exist. Certainly, as we go on, we're recommending that people move forward with this, but that's toward the end of the presentation. If a full query shows open violations, the driver cannot perform safety sensitive duties. Simple as that. So if you try to bring on a new driver and you do a full query and it shows an open issue, just don't put them to work. If you do a limited query, shows something exists, you follow that up with a full query within 24 hours and they show a violation, you just remove them from safety sensitive duties. So that part is actually very straightforward. The government has also indicated that there will be a batch upload available. it will not have an API process that you can do your internal database programming to do automatic queries, but there will be a batch upload available so that when you do your annual query of your drivers, you can do more than one at once without having to type them in individually. One question that we have fielded is, when will limited queries, when will that annual query be required? And the answer is anytime in 2020, you do need to do an annual query of all of your drivers. Some people are going to do it at the same time as their MVRs. Some people are going to try to do it toward the end of the year when there's more information in the clearinghouse. There's no specific required length of time or any time at once that has to be done. You'll have to do so many per month or anything like that. This also is an interesting point. If you submit a query and there is nothing that shows up, and then later on a violation does show up, the FMCSA will send you an update to any of your queries for up to 30 days. This is crucially important. We're not sure how it's going to work, but theoretically, a driver goes to company A, they know they're positive, they don't get their test back for a couple of days, so they pick up stakes and they go to company B. Company B, they pass their drug test by hook or crook, and they put them to work. Well, company A gets that violation in 2 days later, 3 days later, or if the driver won't answer the phone, it could be up to 10 days later for those of you that know the regulations. That would create the same loophole that we already have, if not for this 30-day update. So we hope that this works very well. We can't wait to see it in action. The push section that the carriers will do in the clearinghouse is reporting a violation. Carriers will be required to do the reporting of these violations. Carriers will be required to send in all positive and refusal alcohol results. Now, keep in mind, alcohol or BAT testing does not go through an MRO. MRO strictly reviews drug testing. Again, going back to the very first slide, the difference between an MRO and a TPA is about to become apparent for everyone. Carriers also have to report most drug test refusals. Now, this is going to be a section for our 201 class when we get into that, because it's very detailed as to which refusals a carrier reports versus an MRO. If you are a company that puts people back to work after violations, after they've gone through the SAP process, you will also have to upload the negative return to duty result and when the follow-ups are complete, not the individual tests. So many people do not have much experience with the SAP process, but it goes like this. A driver has a violation, they go to an SAP, have a face-to-face evaluation and some type of required training, whether it be classes, web training, etc. Once they complete that training, they're allowed to go back to work. Once they pass their return to duty result or test, that test has to be observed. The follow-up tests are prescribed by the SAP. And many SAPs will say, I need you to do X number of tests within the first year, up to 5 years, et cetera, and so on. And that requirement falls on the employer. So if you bring someone back to work after a violation, they pass their negative return to duty test, you then prescribe that they take follow-up tests at your convenience, randomly and unannounced to them, which are also all observed to meet the SAP's criteria. Once those are done, it's your responsibility as an employer to update that all of those have been complete. All of its reporting must be done within 3 business days according to regulations. The last thing that you have to do is keep the records. Now, there's 2 different requirements of records regarding the clearinghouse and employers. First of all, you have to keep the retention of each query that you do and all information received until 2023. It's a very strange regulation. It actually says that as of January 6, 2023, an employer who maintains a valid registration fulfills this requirement. We are only guessing here, but we believe what that means is that they're not, just in case the clearinghouse goes down or doesn't work, it's good to have paper copies for the first 3 years. If it's successful after that point, then we will start trusting the electronic data. The second requirement is that you have to maintain the consent forms 3 years from the date of the last query. And this should apply to limited queries where you are using a consent form outside of the clearinghouse that we discussed. You'll have to maintain those 3 years after employee leaves the company. And again, by 2023, only clearinghouse queries will be required, no more independent drug and alcohol verification of previous employers. Is a CTPA required? All right, what's a CTPA? We've already gone over TPA. A C stands for consortium. The FMCSA has done a mashup of 2 different terms, and they kind of go over it as one service agent. So it stands for consortium/third-party administrator. If you have under approximately 15 trucks, you are required to be in a consortium, certainly owner-operators. And if you're much larger than that, most companies use a TPA to assist them in various parts of the company. Any employer is welcome to use a CTPA to perform all of the actions we've just talked about, anywhere from the application and the consent form all the way through to the reporting of violations. And CMS is certainly going to participate in as much of that as is possible under the regulations, and will certainly, as the website is developed and we see it further, we'll be able to go into more detail on that. Here's the interesting part. If you've seen previous webinars, people say that a CTPA is required for owner-operators, but that's not exactly how the regulation reads. This is almost a verbatim quote. A CTPA is required for any employer who employs himself or herself as a driver. There's no limitation on fleet size according to this regulation. If the company owner or anyone that has an ownership stake is listed as a CDL and in the current employee pool, that at least that person will have to use a TPA. And I think that the reasoning behind that is that you can't trust somebody to report violations on themselves, and so they have to delegate that authority off to a TPA to perform these actions. That's going to be interesting as we go on. We haven't really seen much discussion on this topic. It's typical stuff that we see in these regulations until we get it developed. All right, how much are you going to pay for this? Limited and full queries cost the same thing. Don't know why. Why would you not do a full query every single time for all of your annual queries? The only difference, again, is the consent inside the clearinghouse versus a blanket consent. Different companies are going to do it different ways. You do have to buy before you try. These queries are going to have to be prepaid. The query packages, as they call them, are not yet available on the website. They should be available soon. I don't know exactly when that will be. Regardless, if you look over to the right side, about 99% of carriers are going to pay the flat rate, $1.25 per query, up to, or you can also pick the unlimited plan if everybody has $25,000 laying around. If you do the math, that basically means that a unlimited plan makes sense for you if you're doing over 19,600 queries per year. Unless you plan on bringing on an awful lot of people or a very large company, most of us are going to be using this individual plan for the query. Interesting part though, those fees are subject to change. It is not in the final rule how much it's going to cost. The government has authority to charge enough money to maintain the program. So this is based on a budgetary number. They believe it's going to cost, I think the number is $40 million to maintain this database. I'm not sure about that. But if that management fee goes down, the cost could go down. I've never yet seen a government program that goes down, but we'll see how that goes. But conversely, should the management go up, should the website need more work, should other things happen, this cost could go up significantly. We don't know how much notice there will be before it does go up, but I kind of look at it as stamps. If you're going to mail letters, if you know that the cost is going to go up, it might be a good idea to prepay for some of these, save yourself some money. But we can certainly see this cost going up significantly as time goes on. One interesting note, now we're talking about these are queries. The queries are the only thing that cost money in the clearinghouse. It does not cost money to register. It does not cost money to submit violations that we've seen. It does not cost any money for drivers to register. Only pulling information requires a fee. So that covers carriers. Now we'll jump in and see how drivers use the clearinghouse. I know that we have several drivers in the audience today, and certainly is going to be a training opportunity for every driver that you bring on. A driver only has to register in the clearinghouse to provide consent to a full query. Any driver can go ahead and register the clearinghouse, but if a driver is going to, if they're already employed, they're going to stay with their employer, not look for a new pre-employment, the employer is fine with using limited queries for this annual verification. There's no reason the driver would ever have to register in the clearinghouse. But if they're applying for a new job, or if there's anything that shows up in their history that a limited query would show, they will have to consent to a full query. This is a copy from an FMCSA webinar that we attended, and this is nothing like what it's actually going to look like. It's totally conceptual. But ideally, the way that it will work is the carrier will put in the driver's license number and name of the person they either wish to hire or wish to perform a full query. The driver will then log in and agree or disagree. And again, if they disagree, if they don't provide that, you simply don't put them into safety-sensitive duties, or if it is a follow-up to limited query, you remove them from safety-sensitive duties. One more side note, remember, starting January 6th, all chain of custodies and breath alcohol test forms will contain the driver's license state and number instead of the social security number or employee number. All violations will require the driver's license number as part of the information that gets reported to the clearinghouse. That's certainly information for next week when we do our deep dive, but for all of our collection friends out there and also companies, this is something that we will need to be definitely prepared to do when the new year rolls around. All right, so we've talked about carriers and drivers. So how will service agents such as MROs use the clearinghouse? Our job will be to report positives and some refusal situations, and that's the 201 that I was talking about that will be more complicated. The refusals are very detailed as to how that's going to go. The MRO is responsible for reporting this information within 2 business days. Should an MRO change a result, say that someone is reported as positive and then later, through no fault of their own, is able to provide the documentation that shows that they should not be positive, the MRO has to update that within 1 business day. So MROs within 2 business days, changes within 1 business days, employers within 3 business days. I think they're just trying to cover the map on the amount of time it takes to report things. Substance abuse professionals, they will have to send in their return to duty process, not any test result. Basically, when they do their initial report with the driver, they have to report to the clearinghouse, I've started my reporting with this driver, and then when the person completes their, we'll call it counseling, but their substance abuse professional training, once they go through that, they will send in the completion. At that time, the employer will be able to upload a negative return to duty test result. The SAPs have to report theirs by close of business the day following the action. That's pretty much how the regs read. It's confusing to me, and how they're going to enforce that is certainly going to be a question, but at least it puts a line in the sand of what's requested from the substance abuse professional. So that's it for the service agents. Like we said, the collectors will not be required to use the clearinghouse. Their job essentially remains the same, nothing new from there. But how can carriers prepare for the clearinghouse? First thing to do is make sure that your systems, anyone that you use for driver qualification files, make sure that maybe your HR department, all of the threads that attach to your system do not use Social Security number. That's information that will go away very soon. It's already not included on the DOT physicals, and when it removes from the chain of custodies and drug screens, essentially the drug and alcohol system will not be referencing it anymore, which we think is a great thing. Be prepared with that form that we discussed. Hopefully we will get a template from the FMCSA soon. There will be one that goes out. If you have a good legal team that wants to come up with one, we think it would be an excellent thing to go ahead and start giving to your new hires now. Have them consent to use the limited queries if you wish to use limited queries for your annual stuff. That way, when 2020 rolls around, you already have 2 months worth of new drivers that you do not have to get the same consent form for. You have them at orientation now. It's a great idea to go ahead and start doing that. The next thing, and this is certainly important for audit protection purposes and to announce to your company and to your drivers, update your company policy. We do have a sample policy that we're certainly happy to share that anybody that requests one, but you can easily go to this regulation and it illuminates step by step the different aspects that need to be on any company policy. And the new addition, of course, is the clearinghouse. Many people have not updated their company policy since last year when we updated the drug test panel. So it'll be a great time to do an overhaul of your entire policy to make sure that it is up to current standards. Go ahead and start talking with your TPA. If we're not your TPA, if we're not your consortium and you're here for just informational purposes, reach out to them, make sure that everyone's on the right page as far as training, as far as being ready to go, understanding that it's never too early to have this conversation. Also make sure that your MRO is prepared. And again, there are a lot of people who use an MRO and may use a different TPA. They are different business types. Companies like CMS are both an MRO and a TPA, and so we do have relationships with some of you as only the MRO and some of you with MRO and TPA. But make sure that your MRO is prepared to use the clearinghouse. All right. We're almost done. So a quick review, make sure that you do register on the clearinghouse sooner rather than later. If you do go ahead and register now, they will start sending you updates, and we'll have that link in just a moment. Somewhere in the next month, prepared, at least start thinking about how many queries you would like to buy. Make sure that you have a method of payment lined up through your company where you can buy the right number of queries. Just rule would be however many, if you have 100% turnover, you're going to get your number of employees plus 50% more, because we are almost certain that the random rate is going to go up to 50% next year. Matter of fact, we've informally heard that it will go up. It's not just a thought. Be prepared January 6th to pull a full query for every pre-employment. Might go through a process of how you're going to do that, how you're going to have your driver's orientation create or log into their portal, their clearinghouse login, and make sure that you have it in your process where you will request their consent and then have them log in. So it's important just to go ahead and get that ready to go. And then also be prepared sometime to pull either limited or full queries for your annual verification sometime in 2020. And finally, make sure that you maintain your records. Have a place to save those, whether your current driver qualification files, separate set of files in your HR files, however you want to do that. It's just a good idea to be ready. And then starting next year, if we are in a position where we're going to be reporting violations, we would certainly recommend that you attend our class on the 15th and discuss, just so that you really understand what violations get reported and when. And that's all. The next class that we're looking at, we're going to cover several topics, and a lot of the questions that you're asking today, which we've seen several roll in, really great questions. Can't wait to add those in. But when we get back from the ATA conference, as Larry discussed, there will be representatives from FMCSA, which they've told us these are the actual nerds that have designed the program, will be there to make sure that people have a good experience. So we might have some great information specifically from that conference to share. We'll have our next next webinar. At that time, we will go through and detail the registration process, talking about releases and consent, the violation reporting, as we've talked about several times, and the refusals, which are probably the most complicated part that we've seen, as well as what enforcement the FMCSA is going to provide that we know of. So we got just a couple of minutes left. Let's see if we can find a question. Let's see if one question, if CMS is our third-party administrator, what is the remaining responsibility of the carrier? So the regulations do say that the ultimate responsibility lies within the carrier. So you would have oversight of your TPA. And so it's going to be very important that your TPA provide clear information that shows that query information or that reporting information that shows when the violations were reported on your behalf, so that you can check and make sure, at an audit perspective, when that information gets done. And I think I have another question here, that if BATs are not processed by the MRO, so if either your TPA or yourself are going to be the only people who have access to the breath alcohol tests. That is not something that an MRO gets to see as part of the process. That falls within the TPA. If we're paying your bills, scheduling the services, following up the tracking, that we would know if there is a refusal, and even then, as we'll talk about in the next class, how you're going to handle that refusal, what information gets documented. Couple of minutes left. Let's see. So how far back does a carrier go back in reporting to the clearinghouse? 1, 2, or 3 years? It's a great question, and the answer is only moving forward. So we will start January 6th. MROs, any positives that are reported January 6th or later will be submitted. Any refusals January 6th or later. I have heard some discussion that the FMCSA is putting refusals and positives into the clearinghouse prior to 2020. Don't have any documentation of that. That's not been corroborated anywhere by an official. But if they do, it's the FMCSA putting that in, not any employers. Employers are only expected to start going forward. More question. The change from Social Security to driver's license number. Do drivers need to register every time they move to a new state? The answer is no, but we don't know exactly how that's going to work yet. The FMCSA, and let me take a side note to say, on the link that you're about to see, I'm going to go ahead and skip to the last slide. Whoop, too far. The FMCSA Clearinghouse website has a really good frequently asked questions section. They have done a very good job of that, and this is actually answered in their FAQ. They claim that as a driver moves from state to state, that they will be able to track that driver. That, to me, seems like a very complicated aspect. A driver is in the clearinghouse as themselves, so they'll be identified as a driver's license number. The FMCSA is supposed to be able to track that. Once you're identified by a second driver's license number, that may be something that you would have to update on the clearinghouse, but you should be registered one person, one time, but perhaps with multiple driver's license numbers. So there will be some good follow-up to that. That's really a terrific question. I think we have 20 seconds left, so one more. Can employers set up accounts for drivers? No, that's the whole purpose of this consent form, is to allow drivers to give consent. It's based on HIPAA. It's based on privacy. Drivers are supposed to do this on their own. They are supposed to give consent. I'm sure that there will be some significant enforcement if anyone is found out answering that consent on behalf of drivers. I'm also sure that there are a lot of drivers who will say they don't want to use the technology. They don't want to do it. Will you please do it for them? please make sure your process does not allow any of your orientation staff or other staff to do this for the driver, because I'm sure that there will be some significant enforcement for that. Well, that's it. Thank you for the time, everyone. I think we had a really good turnout today. We can also send additional copies of information to anyone who requests it. And I think almost everyone out there has my email address. It's grady@corporatemedicalservices.com. Feel free to pass on any future questions, and we will do our best to get back with you and to address them in the future webinars. Again, thank you very much, and good luck out there. Be safe.